Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how organizations need to adapt or die, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Angela Johnson. Welcome, Angela.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, can you share with our audience about your background?
I can. I tend to be a bit of a recovered project manager, is how I refer to myself. And it's the right metaphor for me. As a project manager, I always felt like I was checking up on people or being like their adult daycare provider. Why can't these people talk? Why can't people work together and figure it out? So when I found Scrum or the Agile movement, Scrum is the most popular of the Agile frameworks. To me, it made a lot of sense, common sense. And so for the last 18 years, I've really focused on helping people and organizations work together using the Scrum framework and to do work completely in a different way that's more transparent and that leverages more of a team concept.
Obviously, Agile and to some extent Scrum have really become buzzwords lately, but maybe we could start with a little level setting on what that really means.
Sure. The word scrum is just short for scrummage. If any of your listeners are familiar with the game of rugby, or even if they're not so familiar with rugby, one thing people tend to know is that circle, right? That scrummage, that huddle. And so scrum is just short for scrummage. And the metaphor is people working together in a rugby like approach headed towards a common goal. The Harvard Business Review article in 1986 that started the whole Scrum and Agile movement is called the new product development game. And that's what it talked about, people working together. So the creators of Scrum loved that metaphor, hence they called their framework Scrum. So it's not an acronym. Some people put it in all capital letters, which is just silly because then others think it's an acronym. It's really just short for scrummage.
And obviously, both Agile and Scrum were developed for the technology world, and really it was trying to solve the challenges of getting value to the user faster and making sure that we weren't doing a lot of rework that would occur sometimes on what they would call waterfall projects, projects that you go through one phase and then the next and the next. And I know you know this, but our audience may not. But now it's being used a lot, or attempted to use a lot, whether effectively or not, in other parts of the organization. But would like to talk a bit about there's obviously a lot of good points about Agile and what it came to solve, and Scrum as well. Let's talk about some of those, I guess, or key drivers of what makes it such a valuable framework. And then we'll take it further in a minute.
Sure. Yeah, you're spot on with, information technology or software organizations tend to be early adopters. And most of the creators of the Agile Manifesto were, in fact, software professionals. And here in 2023, this stuff is kind of like you say, old news, or it's become buzzwords. So many people are finding value in some of the nuggets in the Agile Manifesto and certainly the Scrum framework, because it's just kind of common sense for our business. One being transparency. What business couldn't benefit from having more transparency, things big and visible instead of being in silos? Or you mentioned, that waterfallish handing off from one group to another. Because if we don't have that transparency, you get a lot of, well, I didn't know. Well, that can result in wasted time, wasted money, rework in some cases when we hand off. So I do think the transparent nature of all of the different Agile frameworks, regardless of what area of the business or organization you're in, is something that everyone can benefit from.
One of the ones that I think really is valuable is the delivering value more quickly. Do you want to talk a little bit about the chunking up of work and what the point is of all of that?
Yeah, some people get hung up on the lingo, so if we say the word sprint or other Agile frameworks call it iteration, chunk is a perfect word. right? It's like, hey, we're just going to chunk it up into smaller pieces instead of big bang, at the end of multiple months or even a year, finding out, oh, shoot, we missed something, or oh, that's the customer's needs have changed. So when we talk about sprints or iterations, people will popularly hear 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks. And it's just a fancy way to say, how fast do you want feedback? Let's make that feedback loop shorter, because if it's shorter, now you find out about the bad news sooner so that you can pivot, you can adapt, as opposed to waiting till the end of a long life cycle and finding out. And you know what? If it's good news, ship it. You mentioned value to the customer. Well, if it works, why do we have to wait? Why couldn't we deliver that value more rapidly? So those time boxes, although some people don't understand them, those time boxes provide us the feedback loop. And like I say, if it's bad news as a small business owner, I want to know about it sooner. I do not like knowing about it when it's too late.
Yeah, and it, obviously in the software world, like you said, it ship like you use the term shipping it to the customer. So rather than waiting, doing version 2 and taking a whole year or something to deliver it, you could deliver maybe like small, like for instance, small increments. Like maybe they do that with the iPhone, right? And they come out with their iOS upgrades iteratively. They don't wait until the new iPhone's released to come out with an actual software upgrade. But that can be used in other areas of the business as well, in the idea of eh, rather than saying, all right, this has to be 100% the final the final end of all, what it needs to be.
Perfect. Yeah.
It can be some sort of version ahead that people can get their hands on and use. Have you seen that used outside of software, and can you give an example?
For sure. We have customers using this in all kinds of industries. Some of our clients make physical products, like you mentioned the iPhone. So we have some customers that make a robotic device that's used in agricultural settings. We have a customer who makes foam that goes in these kinds of devices, right? So in headsets or earbuds and those kinds of things. And one of my clients who makes that kind of a product was able to get their prototype out so fast. It is their foam. You mentioned Apple, that's in Apple's AirPods. And I was
Mm.
just ridiculously proud of them, when they got that business. And then they're hanging with all the different updates and whatnot, but they completely revolutionized the way they used to do work in long life cycles. Their projects would be like 12 to 18 months. Today they work in like 8 to 9 sprints for their releases. So 18 weeks in some cases.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I think of is, well, two things. Is one, having a bias for action, right? Because one of the worst things you can do for your company is spend all your time just trying to plan. There's
Mhm.
no value in just planning. Obviously, there is value to thinking through something and having a plan, but the action of planning in and of itself doesn't deliver value. And so when companies get caught up in this, can't make a decision, or you can't get the project actually started, or and more importantly completed, you end up in this planning cycle endlessly. There's no value there. And so that's one way that this obviously can help. And then the other thing I was thinking of, and the folks on the shows actually heard me mention this a lot, is Jim Collins's shoot bullets and then cannonballs.
Mhm.
So that ability to be able to test and iterate, and like you said already, get feedback, allows you to not put too much investment in a certain direction before you know that it'll work.
Absolutely. The old analysis paralysis is what was going
Mhm.
through my head when you were talking about, hey, it's not that we're not going to plan, right? But planning doesn't give the value to the customer. And the customer may have wanted a skateboard. And so we deliver a skateboard and they go, my needs have actually changed. Because I just thought about, what about if it rains? I need something to cover my head. So I've been in the unfortunate position as a prior project management professional where we would deliver on time, in scope, within budget, and we'd be doing user acceptance testing and the client would go, can't use any of it. Our needs changed a couple weeks back. What? If only we'd
Mm.
known, if only we could have pivoted, if only we could have talked sooner, you
Well,
know?
and that's probably even becoming more and more of an issue. I mean, and like you think, oh, you look back 20 years and then just 5 and then just 2, or maybe even 1 now, and how fast technology changes. And therefore, because technology changes the entire, for any industry, the markets change quickly. Change is accelerating at probably at an accelerating rate. And so kind of what you're saying, you can quickly find out that, you're not meeting the market need any longer.
Correct. And even a year ago, I don't recall hearing about AI or chat
Right. That's
GPT like we do.
exactly.
I mean, my gosh, every other email in my inbox today was about, AI, you're behind if you're not looking at AI. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, so people may have been in development with a product for the past 6 months, and a lot of it may have already become irrelevant if they weren't, like you said, being able to pivot and address those, market changes. Um, the other thing though, I think is a challenge, with Agile and Scrum being a buzzword, and I guess, talking a little more back on technology rather than the whole organization, is a lot of people have used Scrum and Agile as an excuse not to document or not to
Yeah.
have structure. It was almost like this pendulum of people feeling like, project management, had all this documentation. And I do remember, like, there, working in projects where we'd have, 50-page project charter, which, might be a bit much. But on the other hand, I've also seen organizations where they're like, we do Agile, like, we don't know when, what the next sprint holds, or, what the next release holds. I mean, like, they might know the very next one, but not the one after that. And so nobody can tell them, tell senior leaders, hey, this is when we'll actually be able to get the ROI that you expect, because they can't plan out that far because they're doing Agile. So what are your thoughts around that?
That it's just a bunch of horse hockey. Like when I
Mm.
teach scrum classes, even I point out to people that that's a myth. It's not that we can't give you a date. It's not that we can't give you documentation. It's that Scrum and Agile approaches don't start with the documents. Because you mentioned a 50-page charter, right? If I were to say, hey, Jana, I'll send you the SharePoint link to the 50-page charter, just go read the charter. I'm discouraging collaboration with you. Number one,
Mm.
I'm assuming you're going to read it, all 50 pages of it. Number two, I'm assuming you're going to mystically interpret every single word the way it was intended. And as humans, we completely misinterpret the written word all the time. We get
Mm.
lost following directions. We, botch recipes. Look how popular emojis are to try to convey what we really mean. So every agile method said, you know what? We're going to start with a conversation. It's not that we're not going to document, but we're going to start with individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We're going to start with working software over comprehensive documentation. So the more important part is that we talk, we collaborate, show it to somebody, then we document, because now we're documenting our shared understanding. Now we're documenting our shared agreement. And so it's a myth when people say, oh, we don't document, we're agile. It's like, that's not what that word means. The other thing about the forecasting is in Scrum, we have a person that we call product owner, which is the person that's giving the work direction to the team, but they're also the stakeholder liaison. So a product owner's responsibility is to say to those stakeholders, has a date already been promised? Because that never happens, right? Salesperson, oopsie, promising a date. Or maybe we've got regulatory compliance. And the date is the date is the date. And we're trying to determine how much scope, how much work we can get done by that particular date. Or if it's the other way, if it's new product development, and we're saying we are going to adapt as we go, we can still show a forecast at the end of every sprint, at the end of every chunk of work, saying, based on what we just completed, here's where it's likely to put us. So it's again another myth when people say things like, well, we can't give you any of that information because we're agile. That tells me there's somebody asleep at the wheel that either really doesn't know, or they're using it, like you say, as an excuse, to avoid
Mm.
some kind of accountability, lack of accountability. And it's like, no, this is just revealing that that's an opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of them don't get formally trained on the concept, and they just read about it or hear about it and they think they've implemented it. You know, you have some stand-ups to collaborate or whatever, and you have some iterations to do your assigned work, but nobody actually understands the I shouldn't say nobody. There are people out there who don't understand the intent behind it, and you highlighted it really well. It's one thing over the other thing, not we don't do this thing anymore. And that's something I definitely emphasize. But I've also seen I guess I want to take this question kind of two directions. One, I've seen people try to force Agile to work in environments where they don't really work very well. And so I'd like to talk about, I guess, the pitfalls of that, but then also talk about the principles, though, that you could still take and apply anywhere in the organization. That's kind of where we started. You mentioned transparency and we talked about iteration, but go a little more in that. But so starting with the first part, you know, are you seeing people, because it's a buzzword, trying to fit the square peg in the round hole type situation?
For sure. Totally. Like we had a client call up and say, we've tried Scrum, it doesn't work. And I find that fascinating because I'm like, why are you saying it doesn't work when other companies say this is the way we now do work? Tell me the business problem you were trying to solve. It happened to be a human resource department, specifically their recruiting function that they call talent acquisition. They had been given a mandate by the leadership team to hit a certain target. They were trying to staff up. They were trying to increase the number of people working there. And so they said, we're doing 2-week sprints. We're doing all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, so wait a minute. You already have a talent acquisition process. Yep. What is working in a sprint? What is working in a time box doing to meet your goal? Nothing. That's why we're so confused. I wound up introducing them to the Kanban professional.
I was just thinking that. I'm like, that's right. That sounds like a Kanban thing.
You're like, I'm hearing flow. I'm hearing flow through an existing system. And they were so happy. They were like, oh my gosh, this makes so much more sense. And I'm like, yeah, the business problem you were trying to solve is flow more candidates through an already established system. You had no need for the overhead of a time box or some kind of iteration. And so they were happy as heck. So I do see people thinking that Scrum's the answer to everything, and it's not. So I would encourage people to just step way back and go, what problem are we really trying to solve? What's the goal? And does this approach meet those needs or not? Because we shouldn't be working for the method should be working for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I keep thinking you probably can't build a road with Scrum. I mean, but there's principles that you could use. But you know, you can't, you can't, like, the road is either working or it's not working, or a house is either built or it's not built, but you can still get feedback, find ways to get feedback.
For sure.
Without saying, all right, you know, I'm going to deliver this one room and you can move into the one room, but the rest of the house isn't built.
Yeah. One of the litmus tests I offer people, if they're really trying to decide Scrum or no Scrum, not only the element of the time boxing, the sprint or the iteration, but also asking if there's variation allowed. Because in many manufacturing settings, or like you mentioned, a house, you know, there's certain things that just have to happen. And so when I hear project managers say, I've been on plenty of waterfall projects that worked great, I ask more about what the project was doing. And in most cases, when I ask that question, the response I get is a pretty finite problem, like where variation is discouraged. Well, of course, it's going to work well. You know, waterfall is going to work well, or project management is going to work well, because by definition, it discourages change. So if you have a high degree of known specifications, like your road example, we seek to have no variation to those specifications. And so that's where classic project management can work well. But the elements that you mentioned, or some of the things, principles, values from agility that I think would have benefited any project when I was doing, you know, classic project management back in the day. How about checking in 15 minutes or less every day? I mean, what a crazy idea, right? How many times did you wait for the status meeting, whether it was once a month, once every other week, or once a week? And then it's like you found out all this stuff and it's like, hold on. What if we could have found out daily? What a great
Well,
idea.
when I first heard, well, and I can't even remember exactly, but back in like 2011 or 12, and I don't know if I'd heard of Agile yet or not. Um, but yeah, I actually started implementing daily stand-ups on my projects because, well, and it actually started with the test cycle. Like I started having daily test stand-ups because that's really quick, right? You have to
Yeah.
find out information, find out what the issue is, find out what the how to fix it, and then find out whether or not it was fixed so that you could continue testing. But then after that, I actually did continue it throughout projects in general, and we still we do a lot of hybrid work because the work we do is we come to where our client is and meet our client where they are versus
Mhm.
trying to overhaul their entire way they work, because that we're usually coming in to deal with a specific problem or a specific project or something like that. And so we have to go in and we have to meet them where they are. But we'll often do just implementing stand-ups alone can help people just be on the same page and attack the day. And then there's no miscommunication around who's doing what, and things, are less likely to slip through the cracks.
And even if, the language makes people a little curious about what we mean, like daily
Mm,
stand up, actually standing in a room came out of extreme programming, which is one of the agile methods where people were co-located. Scrum calls it a daily scrum. So I even will advocate for saying, can we check in for 15 minutes or less every day? One of my
mm,
graduates calls it a daily sync, because when he tried to call it a daily stand up, his people that he was serving were like, oh, I know you're trying to do that agile stuff. That no, that doesn't fly here. He just changed it on the calendar to say daily sync,
mm.
and they're just fine with it. So it's interesting to me too that some of the buzzwords could really put
Oh,
some people off.
yeah. Well, and I find people go very reactive. I mean, one of the big issues I had when with when agile started becoming a lot more popular is this negative view of actual project management. And I'm like, there's actually, even in software projects, there's room for both. I mean, because like Scrum and Agile don't to the same depth talk about stakeholder management. They do in the product owner side, but that's not what a
Mm,
Scrum Master sees. You know what I mean? Like
correct.
it just doesn't have the same. I find I find the principles of project management about making sure you have, what your communication plan is, and what how you're going to manage your stakeholders and how you're going to manage your risks and issues, and all of those things are important. It just doesn't have to be necessarily always as full blown as the 50-page charter and like in your time
Yeah.
and being collaborative. But there is still space for that, because what I have also found with clients who have implemented Scrum is there's really not strong dependency management between projects, and there's not strong risk and issue mitigation in the world compared to like the highly mature project management organizations that I've seen. And like everybody implements things at different levels, and they all have different maturities, but this whole like I'm taking one idea and rejecting the other, I have an issue with. And I saw it another one of our clients who was super project management oriented, and they threw it out, all of that out the window, no PMO, none of that, and then they came and they implemented safe.
Oh.
And then and they're actually pretty mature at safe, um but the problem that they ended up having is that I kind of look at it as this black box, right? So you have all these inputs that come into the black box, which is the building of the technology through the safe process, the safe framework, and then there's the output. And nobody was planning the input or the output. So meaning so they had a project that they were building a website, an e-commerce website, and nobody took it to legal on like,
Mm.
can we do this, right? Because it was so focused on that technology aspect that none of the planning for marketing or for legal or for was really involved the way it should be. And that's, to me, I guess, where some of that stakeholder management and project management can still come into play. So they brought some of that back, and it's like right
Oh.
sizing it.
Yeah, and an effective product owner from a Scrum perspective would be responsible for all those elements
Exact.
that you just
Yep.
described. the Scrum Guide just doesn't prescribe how a product
Right.
owner does that. So I always tell people, if your product owner wants to use a charter, they can use a charter, but they had just
Right.
have the conversation first and then they write it down, on our shared understanding, because shared documents doesn't always equal shared understanding. So we want to
Right.
make sure we have the conversation first. And I think because people might be a little addicted to that prescription from the project way of working, when we get to something like product ownership and we say, hey, you're empowered product owner. You get to show the risk management how you want to. Some of them, if they're not mature or experienced, struggle.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
they don't know that they can use something that's worked for them before.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think there's just room for it all if you kind of take a step back and look at it big enough. And to your point, like if there's other ways that you want to make it work, that's fine. But the point is it still needs to be addressed.
For sure.
And project, the PMBOK did that. But moving away, I guess, a little bit from software again, I think one of the other lessons would love to hear your thoughts on that I think Agile takes to the broader organization is the amount of work in progress, or in the amount of number of projects that you have going on at the same time, and why limiting work in progress has value. And do you want to share a little bit about the principle there?
Absolutely. The way I like to paraphrase it is, if everything's a priority, nothing is.
Mm.
Because if you remember those requirements documents, and they could be hundreds of pages long in just one project, we throw it over the wall to some people to start work. It's not ordered. So some developers may come at it from a, like you said, a how or a technology perspective. And then if we run out of time, have they delivered anything that's usable or not? In most cases, not, because sometimes they worked on what they thought was cool or what they knew or what they were comfortable with or what they liked. And then they were time sliced across multiple projects. So it's this hot potato effect. It's this, somebody else says, no, 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 you got to work on project B. Well, drop project A, move over to project B. That context switching kills productivity. That data has been out there forever. And so focusing people on the highest priority, because the word priority does mean something is prior to something else. If it's all priority, nothing is, starts to get things done. So instead of starting, we start finishing. And then we're able to grab the next thing more rapidly just through the sheer act of focusing. And I think a lot of our organizations today could benefit from just focusing instead of this, ready, shoot, aim. It's all priority. And you've got people running all over or pulling in disparate directions instead of that rugby like approach pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, and so prioritizing is obviously really key, but I think the other piece you just hit on though is putting as many people on one thing and getting it done before working on, like, even if you have clear priorities, if you're trying to work on 10 things, you mentioned one of it, you have the switching cost, but also it just might drag all those things out longer, and then you actually not getting any value. And so, do you want to share a little bit about why people say there's no value in work in progress?
It's not adding, yeah, it's not adding value to the customer. I mean, if it's sitting in a uh, uh, environment where a customer can't get access to it, if it's not on the shelf and the customer can't buy it, if it's not online and the customer can't get it, it's not delivering value. So what's it doing for us? What's it doing for the end customer? It's like being at a restaurant and going, where's my food? Well, it's ready. It's just back in the kitchen under the warming light. Well, it's not in front of me, so sorry. And in the year 2023 and beyond, if we don't delight our customers, they leave. They vote with their feet in their wallet. And not only that, they make it hurt because they go on the internet and badmouth companies, right? They give you poor
Mhm.
reviews. So the too much work in progress isn't the goal, right? This focus on utilization. Is everybody busy? Well, is the company stated goal to be busy? No, actually, we're in business to produce these products, right? We mentioned phones earlier, or getting food out the door, or selling something on our website. You mentioned e-commerce. Well, then how come we're putting the emphasis on keeping people busy and not working in a way that puts the emphasis on flowing that product out the door? So
Mm.
there is value in putting the emphasis there instead of that work in progress or having a bunch of balls in the air at one time, because the context switching will kill you. It'll delay getting the value out there. And then what's the point if you start taking your customers off?
What are your thoughts about, because one of the other things we see in organizations is people spread across a lot of different things versus being fully dedicated, or at least mostly get dedicated. What have you seen with that and the value or not value, I suppose, of dedication?
Most of it, it's at the heart of the dysfunctions, project or no project, right? I mean, even if I were teaching classic project management, there's value in having people focus because of that context switching cost. And the other thing that I impress upon leaders is built-in excuses. What do you mean? I'll say, well, let's say you've got Jana on 4 different projects and you ask her for a status on project 2. And she says, so sorry, have to get back to you because I was just in a meeting about project 1. Well, how is project 1? I had to leave the meeting early because I got to go get to a project 3 meeting. We don't like that. Oh, dedicate the people, order the work. And you've got radical transparency as to where things are at. You don't have all these excuses, but we've got built in excuses when you have people chasing multiple pieces of work. And that usually resonates with organizational leaders. They're like, I don't like that. The other thing that I point out, because you mentioned risk earlier, I will ask them how they feel about risk. Because I hear, well, Jana's the only person who can do this. Jana's a specialist. She's the only one. So she's assigned to these four projects. Well, what if Jana calls in
Hmm.
Rich tomorrow? To heck with you guys. I won the lottery. I'm quitting. Click. What would you do? Well,
Mm.
we'd figure it out. I'm like, well, you just told me that you seek to avoid risk. I'd say you love it. You live on the edge. Because if you all have your eggs in one person's basket, best of luck. Whereas from an agile perspective or a scrummy perspective, we would share that knowledge. We would start having more people understand what's going on or know how to do something so that we aren't single threaded. We aren't just limiting everything to one skill set or one person.
Yeah. Yeah, because heaven forbid, or even somebody goes on vacation and it slows you
Right.
down.
I always
And
like to say they call in Rich, right? I always, because some people will say, well, what if somebody's hit by a bus? I'm
hit by
like,
bus. Yeah, no,
no.
I knew exactly where you were going with that, because I've heard that too. But what's interesting is I've seen it even though on vacation, like,
Yeah, for
somebody
sure.
takes and you're like, oh, we're paralyzed for a whole week because the person who knows everything is not here. And it's like, and I guess in the States we're kind of bad where we will tell people, sorry, need you to change your vacation or something, because we put the value on the project or the company. Not all are like that, but I've seen that happen. But in
Mm-hmm.
Australia, I've seen it the opposite, where it's like, oh, the resource is going on vacation for 4 weeks, nothing we can do about it. And then like your project sunk. Like that doesn't work either, because you
No.
have like, you got a payroll project or something that you're trying to get out the door that everybody's pay is dependent on, but the resource has to go on vacation for a month because employment law. um, so it's like, to your point, like, while neither one of those scenarios are great from a company perspective, the way you get around it is making sure that you have a level of redundancy and
Mm-hmm.
shared knowledge.
Totally. Yep.
Um, what are there any other things that come to mind for kind of the key things that help? I mean, outside of software projects or projects in general, but organization wide, that companies can take from agile learnings or being more agile.
Yeah, as a small business owner, we use these very values and principles that we teach to run our organization because we're a services organization. Certainly, we offer, coaching and teachings and all that, but we have a physical space. We have a brick and mortar events center in Minneapolis. And so, one of the things that I really believe in is empowering the team. Even though I am the CEO, if you go look at our, business charter and you look at who's the boss, okay, Angela Johnson's name is on everything. I love to say that I just work here. I have the pleasure of just working here because I literally empower this team. I never want to be the bottleneck. I never want a piece of business or a client engagement or a client event held up because, oh, I got to check with Angela. Oh, I got to check with Angela, or I got to go see what Angela says. People are empowered. If they want my input, if they want my opinion, happy to give that, but I do not want to hold anybody else up. So everybody on this team is empowered, and then we'll deal with whatever falls out of that. But they have a stamp with my signature on it. They have company credit cards. They have access to the company checkbook, and nobody in the 13 years that we've been in business has ever abused it. That's sometimes strikes fear in the hearts of organizations that are a bit more command and control. And I'm like, I've not had a problem once with those issues. And then somebody in one of my last conversations said, well, it sounds like you hire adults. What a crazy idea, right? You treat people like adults, they will act like adults. So it's all about creating the environment. And I think any leader in this day and age, needs to create the environment to get the results that they want.
Yeah. Well, last kind of key question. We talked about, being able to adapt or die. Or I mean, you need to adapt or you will die, probably is a better way to say it. How does Agile help with that?
The time boxing that you mentioned at the beginning enables that. But the other thing is the transparency. That's only one element of it. We are transparent about what's going on, and then we inspect what are our options, what can we do about it, what should we do about it, and then adapt accordingly. So the example I used when you and I were talking is my own organization. When COVID hit, all of our classes were in person, and that was actually a contractual thing. We had to teach in person or we would lose our license for the certification. And the CEO of the Scrum Alliance said, up, virtualize everything. I know people who flat out went out of business or said, we'll wait it out. And I was thinking to myself, there is no waiting it out. The genie is out of this bottle. The world just changed. Get on board or you are out of business. My team, meanwhile, got on a call and said, how do we figure this out? Because we have a class in 2 days' time. So we spent that afternoon playing with Zoom, playing with a tool called Kahoot to do little online quizzes and games. We just virtualized the very next class. And then we did the next one. And then we did the next one. So we literally were transparent with one another, inspected, hey, what are our options? How could we figure this out? And then we adapted together. And there were some people at that time, I remember sending me notes, or I'm, connected with them on social media. They're like, how did you do this so fast? And I kind of felt like, seriously, this is what we teach other companies how to do. And if we can't drink our own champagne, we've got a problem.
Absolutely.
So we just had to figure it out.
No, that's a great example. Well, it's been a great conversation, Angela. What three things do you want to leave top of mind for our audience?
The three that I would recap for everyone is, if it's all priority, nothing is. So pick one, right? That's going to get you focused and you're going to see more productivity. The second thing is more frequent check-ins, right? I don't care whether you call it a daily sync, daily huddle, be more transparent every single day. And then the third one is team. We, not me. So if you deem yourself an expert in something, you should be able to teach. So who's your backfill? Because we do want you to go on vacation.
Right.
We want you to take days off.
Or retire rich.
Exactly.
Fallen rich.
Exactly.
Right. Well, Angela, how can folks learn more about what you do or connect with you?
They can visit scrumfiles.com. And if they go to scrumfiles.com, we even have a free download, 3 easy ways to get started with Scrum and Agile.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.